Welcome to Dreamers to Leaders, Keeping It Real with Melody podcast. Melody is a classic dreamer who started as a flight attendant and worked her way to now a tech fashion trendsetter, thought leader, and dynamic entrepreneur in various industries. This podcast is for the dreamers and doers. Learn how to think, act, and speak big as business leaders share how they turned from dreamers to leaders.
Hello and welcome to the Dreamers to Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Melody. Our guest today is an executive coach. He helps executives and organizations bet on themselves by developing their inspirational and emotional leadership. He also has published over 5,000 articles on leadership, inspiration, and emotional intelligence. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Phil Johnson. Morning, Phil. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Melody. It's great to be on your show. Thank you.
Let us begin. If you could share with our audience your backstory on how you started as an executive coach specializing in emotional intelligence.
Oh boy, how much time do we have? I've been an executive coach working with executives and organizations all over the world for the last 23 years. Prior to that, I was an executive for 20 years in the semiconductor industry, traveling about 60,000 miles per year throughout North America and the Pacific Rim. But I was born with dyslexia, and my dyslexia forced me to do a lot of what I refer to as emotional labor, and that actually helped to enable me to do what I do now.
So 23 years, that's fantastic. So emotional intelligence, for the sake of our audience out there, what is the main difference between emotional intelligence and IQ intelligence?
Oh, that's a great question. Emotional intelligence, like leadership, is developed. It's an experiential type of intelligence, and it differs from intellectual intelligence in that you can't develop it by reading a book or having a conversation or watching a video. So it's an experiential process. And University of California at Berkeley did a 40-year study comparing IQ with EQ, and they concluded that emotional intelligence was 400% more valuable in determining success in intellectual intelligence. So let me just give you a bit of a numeric example. Let's think of intellectual intelligence as somebody giving you $10,000 a day for 31 days. So at the end of 31 days, you've got $310,000. Think of emotional intelligence as a penny that doubles in value. So day one, you have a penny. Day two, you have 2 pennies. Day 31, you have $10.7 million. Day 40, you've got over 5 billion. Day 50, you've got over 5 trillion. So whereas our ability to do intellectual labor is genetic. If you have a high IQ, your parents had a high IQ, their parents had a high IQ, and you simply inherited those genes. So not everybody can have 160 IQ, but everybody can develop their emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, the value is massively greater than intellectual intelligence. And our educational system has really let us down because it's focused primarily on our ability to do intellectual labor and has done very little to develop our emotional intelligence.
I so agree with you, Phil. As a matter of fact, I think I shared with you that it was only in the last 6-7 years that emotional intelligence, or we call it ESI here in the US, emotional and social intelligence, have been in my radar. So for the longest journey of my adulthood, that wasn't really in really the usual thing that people would really want to invest in developing. But what you're sharing with our audience right now is massive, considering what you've mentioned on that compounding effect of emotional intelligence to an individual. And to piggyback on what you said on the 400% per Berkeley, on how that could impact, an organization. I also read somewhere that, I believe 75% of reasons why one's career is derailed is because of that incompetence or that inefficiency or that lack of emotional intelligence. So I'm so glad that you're here. To actually shed some lights on really the benefit of having emotional intelligence, especially with our platform of effective leadership. So how can one develop emotional intelligence then, Phil?
It always starts out, you have to, first of all, have an emotional connection to something you're trying to achieve, something you want to achieve, that's going to be greater than the fear that gets triggered in us when we leave our comfort zone in the pursuit of that desired result. So it always begins with developing or recognizing an emotional connection to something you feel strongly about. That really becomes what I refer to as the fuel for the journey. If you don't have an emotional connection that's stronger than the fear that's going to get triggered in you, you may want better results than you're currently getting, but you're not going to be willing to do the emotional labor that getting better results requires.
Mm-hmm. So obtaining that emotional connection then, how does one really go about doing that? Are there like methods or practices or exercises that one could harness in order for them to understand how to connect emotionally to maybe a goal, or is there any technique to that effect?
Yeah. It helps to become more present, more in the moment. Think of our passion for instance, in my case, coaching, leadership and emotional intelligence. Although I've been doing it for 23 years, I've been wanting to do it for about 53 years.
Oh, wait.
And even though I was scared to get started, I kept getting pulled back to this passion. It's kind of like my true north.
Your true north, yes. That inner compass. Mm-hmm.
We all have that true north in us. And if we can learn to lower our walls by being more present, we can allow that passion to surface. So we kind of shut off that voice in the back of our head that's always going. We need to kind of quiet our mind to allow that passion to become more apparent for us.
Mm-hmm. And thus, I think the book behind you, Being in the Present, and that's kind of his main essence of what he teaches. Part of mindfulness, and setting aside time to meditate would help us connect to that inner voice. Would you agree?
Yeah,
Phil?
we actually, it's interesting. This may surprise our listeners, but we spend over $4 trillion every year trying to be in the present moment, trying to shut off that voice in the back of our head. And some of the ways we do that are destructive, and they actually pull us below consciousness. But learning to lower our walls enables us to actually become more conscious, so we actually can evolve as opposed to devolve.
Mhm. 4 trillion. In what sense? What would kind of be the resources to that effect? Would that be, all the sound apps or relax or spa or what?
Well,
What is that?
some of the negative aspects, some of the negative ways we try to do it is with drugs and alcohol.
Oh, gotcha. Aha. So the
Um,
vices.
well, we don't know that they're vices necessarily. Um, we're really trying to be more present. We're really trying to shut off our thinking process. Um, and that's actually it's a destructive way to do it, but that's the objective. There are more constructive ways to shut off that voice and be more present. That more and more people that have to do with the development of our leadership and emotional intelligence.
hmm So those vices that you mentioned, from alcoholism, maybe even gambling and whatnot, people that are trying to escape and not listen to their inner voice, right? Not confronting the monkey behind their back type of thing. So what would be your top tips for those who want to evolve and not regress and really have to listen to that inner voice? You mentioned being in the moment, and part of that, what would be something practical and concrete for our audience out there to do and practice today after listening to us?
Yep. So we actually give away our energy based on ego-based fear, and that pulls us out of the present moment. And I'll give you an example of how we do that. And it's called authentic listening. And the key to authentic listening is not to take anything personally. How somebody feels about you, whether they like you or whether they don't, has nothing to do with you. It has to do with what's going on inside of them. But if how you feel about you is based on how anybody else feels about you, who's running your life, you or them? Giving away your energy to them to determine how you should feel about yourself. If you like me, I like me. If you don't like me, I don't like me. So as strange as that might sound, what I've described is all of social media. We bend over backwards trying to get people to like us so that we can feel better about ourselves. And that's just one of many, many ways we unconsciously give away our energy, and that causes us to raise our walls, and we become more resistive, more judgmental, and more attached to outcome, and that blinds us to being able to connect with who we are or see others for who they are. So it's quite it's a global problem.
So I think you could add that to the list of those that would not really help with anyone trying to develop emotional intelligence when, yes, there's alcoholism, and then there's also that obsession or addiction to social media and all the fakeness, the opposite of authentic. And what do you think is a good solution to that? Or that's for another topic.
Learn to stop giving away your energy. Here's the key. Learning to stop giving away your energy creates remarkable results. You become a more inspirational leader. You develop your emotional intelligence. You become more conscious of what's going on in you and around you, which also frees you from your ego-based fears, which leads to higher levels of trust and engagement, which guarantees, and I want to underline, guarantees career, corporate, and personal success. And I'd like to give you an example of a company that's currently valued at $2.2 trillion, and they're doing about $600 billion a year in annual revenue. And their primary hiring focus is emotional intelligence.
Ooh, all right.
That company is Apple.
Apple.
That's why when you walk into an Apple store, the energy you feel is an example of a more emotionally intelligent environment. They're not trying to sell you anything. They're trying to understand your pain and, if possible, offer a solution to your pain. They want you to have a great experience. Whether you buy anything is secondary. So maybe you'll go tell your friends and they'll tell their friends. And if you think about it, that energy you feel in that environment is a very different energy from the energy coming out of the stores surrounding that environment. So because of the accelerating rate of global change we're facing, more and more companies are hiring, developing, and promoting largely based on emotional intelligence.
Thank you, Phil, for sharing that. It just validates again. I'm actually launching a book. It's called Celebrate, SELL. Celebrate. It's a sales guide for those who hate to lose. And part of that is, a chapter on marketing. And truly with sales marketing, there's all that emotional connection, emotional messaging that needs to be present for people to, to have it resonate and for them to identify themselves with a brand, so on and so forth. And Apple truly amplifies that with their emotional messaging on how they brand, the branding, the minimalism, it's almost now synonymous to product exclusivity. And
what they do
and all that.
is all purchasing decisions are made in the limbic part of our brain. All purchasing decisions are made emotionally first. And then after we've decided what we're going to do, we look for features and benefits intellectually to justify the decision we've already made emotionally. So by developing your emotional intelligence, you are literally able to out-care your competition. Because we've evolved from herds and tribes over hundreds of millions of years, we've had to develop the ability to sense whether somebody's trying to help us or eat us. So we have these specialized brain cells in our prefrontal cortex that brain scientists call mirror neurons. That's why when you walk into a room, you can sense the energy in the room, or you're having a conversation with somebody, you can sense their authenticity. You can sense whether they're trying to help you or hurt you. So if you lower your walls, if you develop your emotional intelligence, people will pick up on that, and you'll be able to develop a higher level of engagement. So if a customer feels that your success and their success are connected, they'll find a way to do business with you, even if you don't have the best pricing or the best technology. If they feel that if they don't trust you, they'll find a way not to do business with you, even if you have the best pricing or the best technology. So really what it comes down to is emotional intelligence. As you develop your emotional intelligence, the ROI continues to increase exponentially.
And I think you touched on something that you shared the last time on the ROI difference from a company that's that really has EQ as their primary, training, or wanting to make sure that the staff are the organization really has that EQ as a forefront of what they need to develop versus IQ. So for our listeners out there, yes, it's good to have that intelligence, right? And all that. But, studies that you have shared, from Berkeley to, if we really understand the success of Apple and how EQ really can benefit an organization, not only an organization, but I think in your personal relationship as well. Would you agree, Phil?
Yeah. We're facing a tsunami of accelerating global change with a 500 million year old brain that doesn't like change. Some scientists estimated in this century, we could experience the equivalent of 20,000 years worth of change, or 200 centuries worth of change. That has never happened before. So we need to be developing our emotional intelligence to be able to deal with the fear and anxiety that's going to trigger in us. The development of emotional intelligence has become essential, not only for career, personal, and corporate success, but it's really essential for us to continue to grow as a species. We're really, in many ways, we're at a tipping point. The development of emotional intelligence is going to become a multi-trillion-dollar-a-year industry because it represents a whole part of our development that's missing. Our educational system has failed us. Our employment system has failed us because it's focused primarily on our ability to do intellectual labor and has done nothing to develop our emotional intelligence. So we're heading into this tsunami of accelerating global change. And we're completely unprepared for the drama, chaos, and conflict that's going to trigger in us, both biologically and sociologically.
Mm-hmm. That is, God, that is so true. With Chat GPT and the invasion of AI, right? I mean, of course, there's so much advantage and benefit of that, but there's also the challenges of the takeover of AI in
is just
world.
a tool. AI is just a tool. It's a reflection of our current level of consciousness. So AI is basically goes in and looks at all the data everywhere. So it's really without judgment. Yeah. And so in order for AI to become a better tool for us, we have to raise our level of consciousness. We have to raise our level of emotional intelligence. And as we do that, the tool will become better. Mm-hmm. But it will only reflect our current level of consciousness.
I agree. So that is a tool. The social media is another tool. I mean, all these bombardment of info overload, right? So having a high self-awareness, right? Having high emotional intelligence, emotional and social intelligence, and developing that compassion and empathy as a leader. Those are ingredients.
Emotional intelligence involves feelings, and this is where it's important. Whenever we take an action that causes us to move outside of our comfort zone, there's a part of our old lizard brain called the amygdala that for the last several 100 million years has been trying to keep us safe and alive by making sure we never do that. And if we do, it automatically triggers the release of a hormone into our bloodstream called cortisol. And that causes the executive center of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, to shut off. And we go into what psychologists refer to as an amygdala hijack. Some people lash out. Some people run away. Some people freeze like a deer in the headlights. When that happens in conflict situations, people die. When it happens in business or personal situations, relationships die. We burn trust. So as an analogy, if you think of your amygdala as a very frightened 4-year-old child, the development of our emotional intelligence acts like a big brother or a big sister to quiet the amygdala response down and better enable us to feel the fear and anxiety that change and innovation always triggers in us and moves through it towards what it is we're trying to achieve, as opposed to allowing that fear to keep us trapped in our comfort zones. So emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence are two very different types of intelligence. And quite frankly, intellectual intelligence is vastly inferior to emotional intelligence.
You also mentioned energy a while ago. So let's talk about that relationship of energy and emotion and how it affects frequencies. Share with our audience how that is related.
Absolutely. We're only actually conscious about 3 to 5% of the time, which is fine. The rest of the time, we're relying on our unconscious habits to drive the bulk of our behavior and our results. But when we're born, we're not born with a conscious mind. We are born with an unconscious mind, but we don't start to become conscious until we're about a year or so old. But we immediately start wiring up our brain, creating the neural network pathways in our brain that become our habits in order to survive, fit in, get food, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of those habits unconsciously cause us to give away our energy. And we do it in lots of different ways. How we communicate, listen, take responsibility, make decisions, all sorts of ways. But when we give away our energy, it creates an energy deficit in us. So at the same time we're giving away our energy over here, we have to be trying to replace that energy by trying to steal energy from other people over here. And that dynamic is going on inside of everybody, everywhere, all over the world, all the time. And that is the root cause of all drama, chaos, and conflict. and that is the reason why there's such toxicity within organizations. Gallup estimates the current level of employee engagement worldwide is about 13%. Low levels of employee engagement are costing U.S. economy alone over $1 trillion a year. And it's all related to energy physics. It's all related to our unconsciously giving away our energy and the subsequent need that triggers in us to steal energy from other people.
Mm-hmm. So it's the energy vampires, right? I think that's the term that they use now. And what's funny is yesterday, I think I told my son how important energy is, and it's just weird that we're talking about it. And I said, the minute you walk in the room, it's either you affect or infect people, right?
It's called emotional contagion.
Yes, so true. So true. So I like that. And also, I think this last week, I've been really devouring, books, materials that talk about the emotion, the feeling, and how really you can affirm and you can say things and again, keep affirming stuff. But if you don't have the emotional connection, as he said, or that feeling to what you're saying, then somehow the energy that you emit isn't really there to affect any change.
It's called ego-based fear.
Ego-based fear.
Yeah. Our ego wants us to feel superior or inferior, but it never wants us to feel equal. And it does that to pull us out of the present moment. Anyways, it's a much longer discussion, but the development of emotional intelligence enables us to distance ourselves from our ego-based fears. So we become more of the observer of our ego as opposed to being controlled by our ego.
So for our listeners out there, so we hear fear, right? And as they say, fear is believing in something that you don't see. It's faith and fear. So would you believe in something that you don't see that is something that's detrimental to you, or believe in something that you don't see that's going to help you?
There's different types of fear. There's real fear, like, you shouldn't step off the curb in front of a bus. That's a really good fear to have. Right. And then there's psychological fear, which has more to do with our egos. But fear is not the enemy. We need to learn to, and it's not going away. It serves an important function. We need to coexist with our fear, acknowledge it, and be able to move through it towards what it is we're trying to achieve, as opposed to allowing that fear to keep us trapped in our comfort zones. That's why the development of our emotional intelligence is so important, because it will enable us to do that.
There was also something that resonated with me the other day. I think it was Nightingale. He said about what is the secret of happiness, Phil. So he said, secret of happiness is freedom. And the secret of having freedom is having courage. And really, if listening to you, what is courage? It's the mastery of fear, right? You're being able to like shush that voice that paralyzed you.
The freedom is being able to coexist with our fear. And it's the ability to be able to distance ourselves from our ego-based fears. And we do that by learning to stop giving away our energy. Learning to stop giving away our energy automatically creates that freedom, that distance from our ego-based fears, as well as it develops inspirational leadership and everything else we've talked about. But the root cause of all the drama, chaos, and conflict we experience and see everywhere, and the solution to that root cause problem involves energy physics.
So share with us, Phil, how, you're in an organization, you go to work, right? And you want to guard your energy. How does one do that? How does one not just give it away? What are ways to do that?
You develop the habits to stop doing that.
And how? So you walk in a room, how do you not give energy? Because that's kind of part of you, right?
Because it's always your choice. Between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space, you get to choose how you're going to respond. So regardless of how anybody else is behaving, you have the ability to choose how you're going to respond. So what I actually work with executives and organizations in the Master of Business Leadership program is I give them the habits to get them to stop giving away their energy. I show them how they're giving away their energy, and I give them better habits to practice to stop doing that.
So give us an example of that. Just example of a habit to develop.
Well, I did. I gave you an example of authentic listening, how people give away their energy in determining how they feel about themselves based on how others feel about you. Mm-hmm. See, whether somebody likes you or whether they hate you,
stepping out, okay,
has nothing to do with you.
Mm-hmm. Right. So basically, being able to pause, right? Mm-hmm. So if someone is saying whatever, you pause and then you objectify that that's not you, and you know who you are, type of thing, versus reacting, right? So analyzing.
They're entitled to their opinion,
100%.
But their opinion doesn't need to be your opinion. If you like me, that's great. If you don't like me, that's unfortunate. But either way, whether you like me or whether you don't, won't determine how I feel about me.
What you think about me is none of my business. That's your thing. You also mentioned about, that emotional intelligence can be developed, and the motivational change, that there are two sources of that motivation. Can you share with our audience briefly on what are those components?
Sure. Mm-hmm. There's only two sources of motivation that will cause us to be willing to leave our comfort zone in the pursuit of better results. One is pain, the other one is passion. And hardly anybody's connected with their passion, at least not initially. So for the most part, the motivation to achieve better results is usually driven by an urgent desire for better results than they're currently getting, i.e. pain. So the first question I ask anybody is, what do you want? Because when they tell you what they want, they're also telling you what they don't have. And the bigger the gap between where they are versus where they want to be, the more motivated they are to look for a solution to close that gap. And without that motivation, change is impossible. It's kind of like the motivation is like putting fuel in your car. If you don't put the fuel in the car's not going anywhere. If you don't have that emotional connection to a desired result that's greater than your fear, you may want better results than you're currently getting, but you won't be willing to do the emotional labor that getting better results requires. And quite frankly, most people aren't. So what they try and do instead is, if they're not willing to change themselves, they often try to change everybody else using some type of position-based power to control and manipulate others. And that's what we've been doing for thousands of years. And that's why the level of employee engagement is so low.
So I'm interested on that. So let's say you have a team of 12, let's say, and you want them to be more engaged, right? To help with the whole vibe and whatnot. What is the number one thing that you would tell your client? Okay, hey, your team sucks. They're not doing well. This is what we need to do. This is the first exercise. What would that be?
There's a methodology for individual change, and there's a separate methodology for organizational change. But you cannot have organizational change without individual change first. So you have to work with the individuals to help them understand what their source of motivation is, or even if they have one, and help them to achieve that desired result. And in doing that, they can become better leaders and more emotionally intelligent. And the more people you train, coach to be able to do that, the better it is for the organization. Let me give you an example of the organizational change methodology. Think of an organization as a big pool of energy. Most organizations are quite toxic. In other words, they're trying to steal each other's energy unconsciously. So the more people you train within that organization to learn to stop giving away their energy, right, the more you're reducing the toxicity within the organization. And you're forcing people to lower their walls or leave the organization for a more chaotic organization. The point is that by developing the leadership and the emotional intelligence of the individuals in the organization can heal itself from the inside out.
Right. I like that. Phil, so with all the benefits of having an organization that is high on EQ, what do you think are the challenges that we are facing as a society in the quest of developing EQ?
There are three primary sources of resistance we have to change. Two are biological and one sociological. The first one I mentioned, the first biological source of resistance I mentioned is our amygdala, right? The second biological source of resistance we have to change is our existing habits. Once we develop a habit, it's there forever. And although we can develop new habits at any age, it's called brain plasticity or neurogenesis. Those new habits are always going to be weaker than the old habits, because when we're born, there's an insulation layer that goes around the neural network pathway called myelin. And when we're born, it's thicker than when we're older. So that even though the new habits can work better than the old habits, there's going to be a constant ongoing internal battle between the old habits and the new habits for dominance. The third source of resistance we have to change is sociological, meaning that the people around us don't want us to change. Because if we change and start to get better results, maybe they're going to have to change, and that scares the hell out of them. And the best way to ensure they don't have to change is to make sure we fail, so they can say, look, I told you so, now get your head down and come back into the herd with the rest of us. So even though this process that I'm describing will work for anybody, anywhere, at any age, doing anything and produce phenomenal results, unless you have an emotional connection to something you want to achieve that's stronger than your fear, you will not be willing to do the emotional labor that getting that result requires. So it all begins with developing or connecting with something you want to achieve that motivates you to leave your comfort zone in the pursuit of that desired result.
Nice.
You know the old saying, if somebody can talk you out of doing something, let them, because it really wasn't that important to you anyhow. So what you're really looking for is something that you cannot be talked out of.
Regardless of all the extenuating circumstances and all the nagging voices from inside too.
It's called grit.
With all the challenges that you've mentioned, from the amygdala to the habits to that social factor that one needs to contend with, and knowing the benefit, from increasing tremendously compounding effect of the ROI and all that benefit of developing EQ. How can our audience reach you if they want assistance on that?
I'll put a link to my my Zoom calendar in the chat box, and anybody that would like to find out more information or continue to the conversation, I'd be happy to meet with.
Love it. I also like the fact that you've mentioned that this has been your passion for like 50 years, and it's only 23 years that you've actually put it into practice, helping people out. So that's a long time of having that desire to help people. So Phil, thank you so much for gracing the show, and we wish you continued success.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being with you.
And for all our dreamers out there, keep believing. You got this. Till next time.